Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar news update video. So a couple of things to cover here, mainly focused on this kind of piece of Avatar news information here with some extra info on the animated Zuko movie. But I also have an update on the Avatar Legends role-playing game shipping to cover. I'll say it actually right now. I have just got, as of today, early access to Avatar Generations, the mobile game. I am planning to do a video tomorrow showing off some gameplay with some commentary. Still haven't fully figured out like how exactly I'm going to do the recording of that, but I think I know what I want to do. But it just means that there wasn't really the time today to get it out the day I got access to it, but for sure tomorrow I'll have a video for you on that. So just be aware of that if you want a bit of an in-depth dive into Avatar Generations and how it plays and how it works. I'll be covering that tomorrow. So as you can see on screen here, Avatar News, his first exclusive of the year, is that the animated Zuko movie, which he's talked about before, is coming to theaters and it's confirmed for 2026. Now, when it comes to sort of what his sources and the information he's got are telling him, that's what the news post here is about. I'm a little surprised he put this in the full headline and all the kind of graphics and stuff like that. The projected date of October 9th, because it does feel like this is just him guessing based on the kind of the plan being a movie every year. But I don't think there's anything to fully suggest that they necessarily are fully planning it to be like a year effectively to the day between movies. I get the sort of logic he's going by, but I'm not necessarily sure. I like, at least if I was doing the post that way, that I'd put this like that. But anyway, the key point is that it seems like if you are buying into this information and you're using this to kind of piece together the schedule, it now looks like, okay, ATLA, sort of like Aang and Friends YA movie coming in October 10th, 2025. Now the Zuko movie confirmed for 2026. And yes, realistically, it makes sense to be a full year on. So sort of probably October 9th, probably at the earliest, potentially, is realistically the idea here. So it means we're getting like movies focused on ATLA characters to start off with, 2 of them. Now, that's good. I think it's good that we're gradually getting this sort of like unofficial confirmation of this stuff ahead of, I guess Avatar Studios will probably move this year to confirm probably the full plans for like 2025, maybe 2026. The big thing I want to know is I want to see official confirmation of the show, the first show. If it is that Earth Avatar show, I'd like to see them mention that officially during the year. Other than that, like, I don't think there's really too much to say about this, because I suppose linking it together with some of the other information we have, like he says here, we do know that the first movies of the first 3 years are not a trilogy. This came from EW, so it is more on the official side of things. They seem to learn when they announced the 3 sort of completely untitled movies at the time that they were 3 sort of like separate standalone projects. Now, that was back in like the middle of last year. Has the lineup changed since then? Because obviously it's a little bit interesting that they're going for basically Aang-focused movie to start off with, then Zuko-focused movie, and they're apparently not like a sequel to each other. That's almost surprising to me. I'd be... Maybe there'll still be some link, but it's not like a direct sequel thing. That's why they're more teasing it as like separate projects, but we'll see if there is any kind of linking together of that. The big thing is that, like, does that mean that the Zuko one is set in like a different kind of like time period? Whereas we know the adult gang movie is going to be basically them as young adults. So somewhere between like 18 to 25. Might the Zuko movie be set when like he's older? Is probably the big thing. But this just gets into the sort of speculation that, like, it's very difficult in my mind to in any way predict what the actual stories are going to be for both of these movies now that this seems to be where we're kind of leaning the speculation towards, is that what is that first ATLA movie going to be about? What is the Zuko movie going to be about? The really obvious stuff is like, I guess the adult gang movie probably has to be, you know, Republic City and something with that. But is that too like obvious? Like, is that enough of a good plot to just make the movie? Like, are we just gonna have like the day of founding of Republic City? Like, what's the antagonist? What happens in it? Or is this movie meant to be more of a kind of nostalgia, more fan servicey movie that is just here to showcase the characters at this age, doing some cool bending, in action, interacting with each other at these ages we wanted them to interact with each other at, and just it to be that showcase of here's what you have waited so long for. Like, what, by the time this comes out, it's going to have been what, you know, like what, 17 years since the end of ATLA by the time this actually comes out. So that's a long time. That's nearly 20 years. People have been waiting to see in animation the continuation of ATLA. So, you know, I can see like why they would want to maybe lean that in the more of a direction of like, this is the movie that really is just there to fully appeal to fans. But knowing Mike and Brian, I don't think they'll do just that. They're going to try and do something a little bit more like unexpected, that like we're probably going to be surprised by like what the plot is, how intense it is. But they're maybe fighting a little bit against the idea that like, if something too big happens, we're maybe going to be wondering, why wasn't this ever like addressed in Korra? Why did this never come up in Korra that this wild thing happened? So does that limit what you actually can or can't do? And this is why when it comes to talking about the Zuko movie and maybe a slight tie-in to the first movie, this is why the Azula plot is typically what I think you have to focus on in terms of what they could do as the movie, because you sort of wonder like, okay, Azula never mentioned in Korra, so we actually have no clue the end of her story, what direction they go in from where she is now to where they go there. Now, we're going to be getting the Azula comic, of course, later this year, Azula in the Spirit Temple. That should be, we assume, the transition of her away from the kind of where she is at the end of Smoke and Shadow into probably more what we assume they're going to do with her in Avatar Studios animated projects. Now, if you ask me, just without this restriction of like the movies aren't like connected, you know, apparently they're 3 standalone stories, I'd be leaning more in the direction of like the adult gang movie would be the last time Azula is used as a villain in a movie. She tries to, you know, get in the way of Republic City, and she's stopped by the gang as adults. This would then potentially set up a more character-focused Zuko, Azula, and family movie as the second one. Now, can you do that in a way where it gets around this seeming restriction that they're standalone stories? Can that work? That in that like Azula would be the main transition point, but you're fundamentally like changing your cast focus from one movie to another. That feels like a way you can do it, where it's like, say like the Marvel movies. They are fundamentally, most of them, standalone movies that are technically sequels to like the one that came just before, just by virtue of it being a movie set in the same universe. So they might do something like that. We have to wait and see. But the Azula stuff feels like one of the very like obvious things to do, because her arc is wide open, and we, for the most part, I think have an idea about where the other characters, what happens with them, and so on. Now, the other idea with Zuko, and it's mentioned here as well, is like, what if they do like old Zuko? What if it's more Korra era, or more like just before Korra era? Like, it's the characters when they're older. And this maybe gets more into the idea of one thing you could do is have it be a little bit more like White Lotus, Red Lotus focused, and sort of cover like Zuko kind of becoming involved in that a little bit more heavily. Because one of the big interesting things that I think a lot of people often forget is that Zhai Bao, the guy who splintered the Red Lotus off from the White Lotus, is a character who is technically alive in current ATLA era. Now, we often think about, oh, he must be this ancient character, but No, Iroh knows him very specifically. Like, they're part of the same organization. Like, they know each other. It's just like we don't know the full what exact age he is in comparison to Iroh and stuff like that. But the idea is that he's around. So what if the plot of maybe the Zuko movie is more, this is when we see the Red Lotus form for the first time, and you get that contrast between how they developed the sort of like legacy that they had as we saw them in Korra. Here's them in action for the first time, and what that separation actually meant. There is the potential for kind of like bits and pieces like that, but it just serves the purpose of highlighting that unless you sort of super try to account for what theoretical new characters they could introduce, just involving the stuff we know about, it's kind of hard to predict what they're going to do, except for highlighting sort of except for highlighting the kind of more fan servicey little moments that we want, for sure. But again, he clarifies it in the post that, again, the day and month of our prediction, 2026 is what's more the news here, is that he was cautious about saying in his posts in December that for sure the Zuko movie is the second one, is the 2026 movie. Now he seems to have more direct confirmation from his sources telling him that, yeah, this seems to now be locked in. That if you're following all the Avatar news stuff, those first 6 projects of 2025 movie and show, 2026 movie and show, 2027 movie and show, we now have seemingly the 2025 movie is the ATLA movie in October 2025, followed by the Earth Avatar After Korra show also in 2025. Now we seem to know that the movie for 2026 is this Zuko movie, and I guess we'll find out whatever this 2026 show is eventually. This is meant to be this non-mainline show, and then the 2027 stuff is a little bit more of a mystery, but like, I'd be shocked if there wasn't something Korra related in there and stuff like that. So just keep that in mind. We'll move on then to the Avatar Legends role-playing game shipping update. So we're mid-January here, and shipping continues. It's been ongoing. There's been a lot of frustration building. It was already building sort of like pre-Christmas, and it's kind of almost getting worse now. And I think the big problem that's happening now is that even though they're making good progress, like I think a lot of people have their orders and they're getting it, and most people are pretty happy with it outside of a couple of key issues, actually quite a few key issues. The big problem is this retail date. As it gets closer to this retail date, and people still don't have their, Kickstarter pre-order basically, it is a deadline that is just the definition of frustration. Like, no one is going to want to just receive their thing post the 25th and realize that, oh, I could theoretically walk into a store that stocks this on the 25th and just get it. Whereas this thing that I ordered like over a year ago still isn't here. And look, it's out of Magpie's hands in a lot of cases at this point. Now, to be fair, they have caused things to be like that because of their own decision making, in that there seems to be a lot of errors on behalf of some of the companies that they're using, especially for Latin America, like specifically Brazilian orders seem to be affected by whatever way they're doing the kind of customs, signifying what's actually in the package over there. UK and EU orders are being quite badly affected by just what seems like poor handling of the packaging and stuff like that. A lot of people receiving damaged stuff, as well as people just having stuff that isn't really moving because they're using Every, which is a known quite bad company that literally I think is like ranked bottom of like the UK kind of delivery companies. And it's just a sense of like, okay, I think we know at this point that like it wasn't Magpie that chose them specifically, but they chose ShipBob to act as like their kind of intermediary, and then ShipBob chose Magpie. So it ultimately comes back to Magpie eventually choosing a company that would go on to choose this really bad company. Whereas, if they were upfront about this and maybe more involved with the fandom here, the community, people would have been able to tell you well ahead of you committing to using like every, that you shouldn't use them. So we'll see what's happening here. But again, the big update here is just that, okay, January 20th is now the sort of big deadline day. Is that if you don't receive your shipping notification email by the 20th, use the form and basically report your package as being missing, because I guess that is the time at which they've been told, I guess, that the fulfillment from these companies for specific regions is meant to be done by that time. So if it's not done by that time and people haven't received their package, that's when Magpie have to get involved and be like, hey, there's a bunch of people who just have seemingly been forgotten in all of this, and that needs to be dealt with. Now, they have pushed this back from the 15th to the 20th, so they're giving people more or less an extra week here on this. Now, is this pushing the goalpost back further, or is there a valid reason for this? Now, look, if the reasoning behind this is basically that they sort of know, based on the way things are going, that they left it at the 15th, they're going to get like, say, 2,000-3,000 people saying, I haven't got my package yet. Whereas they're hoping that like one more week of notifications going out, allowing the companies to get stuff out there, and they could cut that down by a huge amount, and so it's much easier to deal with things. So just, be patient one more week and we will be able to more effectively deal with sort of the problems that are actually problems, and not just sort of people getting frustrated because they're like last batch of orders to ship from a specific region. That's understandable. I get that. As someone who seems to be in the last week of EU orders, I just checked before I recorded this, I've not heard a single thing about my package moving at all. It still just says, kind of shipping information locked in from back in September when we all did that. So I'm one of the people on the EU side of things waiting to hear anything about my package. So it is a bit frustrating, of course. Now, I understand they can't really do anything based on like what number backer you are, but I'm pretty sure I was like just past the like 1,000 mark as one of the backers, so pretty early on. So it is kind of frustrating that I'm in like here the sort of last week basically is when it's going to ship for me. But you can see here 200 orders left for Australia and New Zealand, 600 left for the UK. Obviously, I guess more, I actually don't know, but I assume it's more than 600, but like they're probably past the halfway point in EU. There still seems to be some VAT issues, but apparently everything is going to ship out in the next week. They're really hoping next week goes really well and gets basically everything out. There's been delays for the US, of course, consistently throughout this. It is the biggest region because there's over 50,000 packages here. But it seems like it has gone, even considering that, probably slower than expected. Again, I think there's been some weather problems over there that's affected like the planned order for delivery of things, and that's gotten in the way. Puerto Rico orders there's some struggle with them. Canada orders, there hasn't really been a lot of updates on this necessarily either. It's been one of the kind of slower ones as well. Big delays for Asia, Africa, and Middle East. Some of the product is stuck in customs. COVID's hitting the region, of course. And then the Lunar New Year is happening very, very soon as well. So this is realistically like, unless they get shipped out in the next days, people in here are probably looking at like February for getting their stuff, which is a bit of a frustration. Latin America is going okay in that I think some people in Latin America were some of like the first people after like Australia, New Zealand, and early UK people to receive their stuff. But Brazilian orders are having some problems. From what people were saying, they are one of the regions where they do have to pay customs and tax and stuff like that on it. It's not done by Magpie ahead of time. So they are very reliant on the company fulfilling these orders to fill out the details correctly, which they haven't. Now, the big thing is what it comes down to here is that this product has been listed, I think, as some sort of a like game or like a kind of toy type thing, rather than just being listed as a book, maybe a book with extras. and that's creating a problem, because books are meant to be, what's the word? They're sort of meant to be like excluded from like kind of like super heavy kind of like, what's it, customs and taxation in that sense, because it's like books are informational and that sort of thing. Whereas obviously, like, I guess what it's actually being listed at is probably like on the super higher end of tax. I think people are saying it's like 80% of the value of the product. So people are paying a lot in this when they're meant to pay like obviously much, much less. Meant to pay some, I think, because obviously they're meant to pay the taxes. That's how it was always meant to be. But it seems like it's a larger amount, and it's a bit of a struggle for people here. Other than that, like I said, the big problem is that the retail date is coming up on January 25th, and it does seem like there's going to be ultimately quite a few people receiving their Kickstarter pre-order after this date, and in some regions well after this date. And it's that frustration of like, why did I bother backing this when I could have just got the book, I waited until January 25th and got the book that way, and probably received it quicker. That's the frustration. You kind of never want that to be the case, but it has happened here, unfortunately. So that's pretty much everything there is to say here. I don't think they're focused on trying to get out the kind of celebrity game session thing and all that stuff until after fulfillment is basically done. Because I'm assuming once they've done that, once they've put out the Celebrity All-Star game, I assume they will say something about the Korra, the Republic City expansion and the Spirit World expansion. But we're still just waiting to see what exactly is happening there. Because, again, we assume that might just be a normal release. But I'm wondering, will they offer, like, Kickstarter backers, like, a way to, like, just order it through here? Because for certain regions, again, it might be difficult trying to go through the retail avenue on the extra stuff to make it complete. So we'll see what happens. So, yeah, frustrating. Magpie are deserving of some criticism, but probably not like all the criticism they've been getting, just because like it is, a lot of it's out of their hands at this point, and it's more in the hands of these shipping companies, obviously. So there's that. And yeah, that pretty much brings us to the end there in terms of news. We're just waiting for other stuff to happen. But like I said, Avatar Generations, I will have a video on it tomorrow, so look out on the channel for that, because I actually have the early copy of the game. So